What started as an ordinary flight turned into a national controversy. A black woman, quietly jotting notes in her seat, is suddenly approached by airline security. A flight attendant claims she was acting suspicious. Within moments, she's escorted off the plane. But just when it seems like another case of racial profiling, something unexpected happens. The FBI shows up. What are they really after? Who is this woman? And why is this single flight about to expose something much bigger than anyone imagined? Stay tuned, because this story is filled with twists you won't see coming. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe so you never miss a story that challenges the way we see the world. Ava Johnson settled into seat 24B, her window seat on Flight 702 from Chicago to New York. It was a 2-hour flight, nothing remarkable. She placed her notebook on the tray table, her pen tapping against the paper as she jotted down notes. The upcoming days would be crucial for her research paper on systemic racism in public services, specifically in the airline industry. Across the aisle, Karen Whitmore, a senior flight attendant, was watching. Her eyes darted between Ava's notebook and her phone screen. A small frown creased her forehead. "She keeps writing something down," Karen murmured to a colleague near the beverage cart. "And she looks nervous." Her colleague, Michelle, barely glanced. "She's probably just working." Karen wasn't convinced. Ava's frequent glances around the cabin, her focused writing, and her serious expression, it all fell off. The airline had trained them to report anything suspicious. Karen prided herself on her vigilance. When Ava momentarily placed her phone face down on her tray, Karen caught a glimpse of the lock screen, an image of Ava standing next to an older man in a suit, both smiling at the camera. The man looked vaguely familiar, but Karen couldn't place him. Then Ava scribbled another note. Karen inhaled sharply. "I should say something." Michelle sighed. "You are overthinking." But Karen had already made up her mind. Discreetly, she stepped toward the intercom and whispered into the phone, "Possible security threat in 24B. Requesting ground intervention before takeoff." The pilot received the alert moments before taxiing to the runway. He sighed, annoyed. The airline's policy was clear: better safe than sorry. The plane remained stationary as 2 uniformed security officers entered the cabin. "Passengers," whispered. Ava looked up, confused. "Ma'am, we need you to step off the plane with us," one officer said. Gasps rippled through the cabin. A man in business class pulled out his phone to record. A mother shook her head in disbelief. "Excuse me?" Ava's voice remained calm. "We received a report of suspicious activity." Ava's lips pressed together. "I am writing a research paper." The officer hesitated, but Karen crossed her arms triumphantly. She was watching people writing things down and acting nervous, she insisted. "That's not normal behavior." A passenger, a middle-aged black woman in row 22, scoffed. "Not normal for who?" Murmurs spread. The man filming muttered, "This is about to go viral." The officers, sensing the growing tension, softened their tone. "Ma'am, please cooperate. We just need to check something." Ava glanced at her watch. "Fine." As she grabbed her bag and followed the officers down the aisle, whispers grew. Some passengers voiced their disapproval. Then, just before Ava reached the exit, 3 men in black suits and earpieces appeared at the jet bridge. "Ms. Johnson?" Ava nodded slowly. One of the men flashed an FBI badge. "We need to talk." The entire plane fell silent. Karen's smirk disappeared. Passengers leaned forward. The man recording whispered, "What the hell is going on?" And just like that, Flight 702 was no longer just a delayed flight. It was the center of a national storm. Gasps rippled through the terminal as passengers craned their necks to watch the scene unfold. Ava Johnson, the woman just accused of suspicious behavior, was now standing face to face with federal agents. Karen stood frozen in the aisle. This wasn't how she expected things to go. The FBI agent in front of Ava was tall, his suit crisp, his expression unreadable. Ms. Johnson, we need a moment of your time. Ava adjusted the strap of her bag. I assume this is related to my work? The agent exchanged a glance with his colleague. Let's talk somewhere private. Ava exhaled sharply but nodded. She had anticipated attention, at some point, just not in the middle of a flight delay, with an entire plane watching. The moment they stepped into the jet bridge, the lead agent, Carter Reeves, lowered his voice. I'll get straight to the point. Your research has raised some alarms at high levels. Ava tilted her head. Alarms? I'm writing a report on racial bias in airline services. Not exactly national security material. Agent Reeves sighed. It is when it exposes a larger pattern. Your professor, Dr. Mitchell, shared your findings with us. What you've uncovered, disproportionate detainments, targeted security calls, and coded language used by airline staff, it matches data we've been compiling for months. Ava blinked. This was bigger than she thought. Your work isn't just an academic exercise, Reeves continued. It's evidence. Ava's mind raced. She had suspected that airlines had internal systems to justify profiling, but she hadn't imagined that federal agencies were paying attention. Why approach me like this? She asked. Reeves glanced through the glass panel at the passengers inside. Because you just became the latest case. Ava turned slightly, her gaze landing on Karen, still standing stiffly near the beverage cart, her face pale. Reeves continued, we weren't expecting this incident, but it plays right into what we're investigating. A flight attendant calls security on a black passenger for suspicious behavior, a term that, in internal reports, is often used in place of racial profiling. The fact that it happened to you of all people, Ava chuckled dryly. Irony at its finest. Reeves gave a small nod. This is an opportunity. We can use this incident to push forward with our case. But we need your cooperation. Ava folded her arms. Meaning? We need to see what's in that notebook. Ava hesitated. Her notes contained months of research data, interviews, anonymous testimonies. She had documented everything from first-hand accounts of discrimination to leaked internal memos. She pulled out the notebook and handed it over. Reeves flipped through the pages, his eyes narrowing. This is solid. Another agent, a woman standing nearby, spoke up. If you're willing, we'd like you to work with us. We can offer protection and access to deeper records. Ava exhaled, her mind spinning. She had started this project to prove a point. Now, she was being asked to take it further than she ever imagined. I'll do it, she said finally. But on my terms. Reeves smiled. We wouldn't expect anything less. Back inside the plane, tension still hung thick in the air. Karen, now deeply uneasy, turned to Michelle. Why is the FBI involved? Michelle shook her head. I think you just made a very big mistake. The murmuring among the passengers grew louder. The man with the phone was still recording. Then the PA system crackled. Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We apologize for the delay. We are currently awaiting clearance to proceed. The pilot didn't sound happy. Karen swallowed hard. If this became public, she could lose her job. And judging by the number of people still filming, it was already too late. Back inside Flight 702, the air was thick with tension. Passengers whispered among themselves, exchanging theories about what had just happened. Karen stood stiffly near the beverage cart, her face pale. She had expected the security officers to remove Ava quickly, maybe issue a warning, and move on. But the FBI? That was a complication she never saw coming. Across the aisle, Michelle glanced at her. Karen, I didn't do anything wrong, Karen snapped, her voice sharp but laced with unease. I followed protocol. Michelle exhaled. Did you though? Or did you just assume something based on she didn't finish the sentence, but the implication was clear? Meanwhile, 2 rows back, Jordan Ellis, the passenger who had been recording the entire ordeal, was scrolling through his footage. He had captured everything the moment security approached Ava. The murmurs of frustration from passengers, the stunned silence when the FBI appeared. With a few taps, he uploaded the video to his social media. Caption: Black woman removed from plane for writing in a notebook. FBI shows up. What the hell is happening on Flight 702? Within seconds, notifications exploded on his screen. This is racial profiling at its finest. So the FBI was already watching? Something bigger is going on. What airline is this? We need answers. Jordan glanced out the window. They were still grounded. Good. More time for the story to spread. At the front of the plane, the captain received a direct message from ground control. He sighed and activated the intercom. Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. Due to an unexpected security review, our departure is further delayed. We appreciate your patience. Passengers groaned. Karen bit her lip. If the flight didn't leave soon, there would be questions from corporate. She needed to do damage control. She approached a man in first class, a business executive who looked like the type to sympathize. Sir, I hope you understand, she whispered. Safety comes first. We can't take risks. The man raised an eyebrow. What risk? A woman writing in a notebook. Karen stiffened. You saw how she was acting. The man folded his arms. Yeah, I saw. I also saw you watching her the whole time, waiting for an excuse. I fly all the time. I know exactly what this was. Karen's face burned. She turned away quickly, but more passengers were looking at her now, whispering. Meanwhile, back in the terminal, Ava sat with Agent Carter Reeves and his team in a private security room. The walls were bare, the fluorescent lighting casting a harsh glow. Her notebook lay open on the table, pages filled with her meticulous research. Reeves was on his phone. Yeah, I've seen it. His tone was serious. He glanced at Ava. That video is already going viral. Ava sat back in her chair, arms crossed. So much for keeping this quiet. Reeves sighed. It was never going to stay quiet. But this might work in our favor. The female agent, Martinez, nodded. Public pressure could force the airline's hand. If they've been covering up discriminatory practices, they'll have to act now. Ava rubbed her temples. I didn't plan for this to happen like this. Reeves closed the notebook and leaned forward. Ava, you started this to prove a point. Now you have the chance to expose something much bigger. Are you in? Ava hesitated for only a second. I'm in. Back on Flight 702, Jordan refreshed his feed and grinned. His video was already at 500,000 views. By the time the plane took off, it would be national news. The tension on Flight 702 was no longer just a quiet murmur, it was boiling over. Passengers were restless, shifting in their seats, whispering among themselves. Some were still watching the viral video, which was spreading faster than wildfire. Jordan refreshed his feed again. 1.2 million views. The comments were piling up. This is outrageous. Name the airline. Why did security target her? She was just writing. How does the FBI fit into this? Something's off. Jordan glanced up and made eye contact with the mother sitting across from him. She gave him a knowing nod. Keep recording, she whispered. At the front of the plane, Karen was desperately trying to maintain control, but control was slipping fast. She could feel the heat of the passengers' stares. Michelle, her fellow flight attendant, hadn't said another word to her since their last exchange. The captain's voice came over the intercom again. Ladies and gentlemen, we appreciate your patience. We are awaiting final clearance to depart. More groans. Someone muttered, they're stalling. Karen's hands clenched. She needed to get ahead of this. With forced confidence, she walked to the nearest passenger, still holding up their phone. Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to put that away. The man frowned. Why? Recording isn't against airline policy. Karen forced a smile. For safety reasons, we discourage filming. Safety reasons? The mother across the aisle interrupted. So writing in a notebook is a safety concern? Taking a video is a safety concern, but profiling a black woman isn't. Karen opened her mouth, but no words came out. The man she had confronted spoke again. You don't get to control the narrative here. He turned his phone so she could see the screen. The video now had 2 million views. Karen felt her stomach drop. At that moment, a flight attendant from the cockpit rushed down the aisle toward Karen. He leaned in and whispered urgently, "Corporate just called." They saw the video. Karen's face drained of color. "And?" He hesitated. "They're reviewing your conduct." Karen stepped back. "My conduct?" The flight attendant gave her a hard look. "You made the call. This is on you." Karen's breath came fast and shallow. She turned toward Michelle for support, but Michelle only shook her head. "I told you," she muttered. "I told you this would backfire." Meanwhile, back in the terminal, Ava and the FBI agents watched as news stations picked up the story. Every major outlet was running the headline. Black woman removed from flight after suspicious behavior, FBI involved. Ava leaned back in her chair. "This is getting bigger than I expected." Agent Reeves, who had been on his phone nonstop, looked up. "The airline's PR team is scrambling, but they can't spin this." Martinez, the female agent, scrolled through Twitter. "And the best part? The passengers are speaking out. This isn't just your word against the airline. It's dozens of witnesses." Ava exhaled. "So what now?" Reeves studied her for a moment. "We keep pushing. We use this momentum to bring down the whole system that allows this kind of discrimination to thrive." Ava tapped her fingers against the table, thinking. "And Flight 702? Reeves smirked. "That flight's going nowhere fast." Back on the plane, the captain's voice came over the intercom one last time. "Ladies and gentlemen, this flight has been officially canceled. Please collect your belongings and exit the aircraft." The plane erupted into noise, frustration, relief, and whispered satisfaction. Jordan stood, still recording. "Looks like Karen's little plan just grounded Flight 702. As the announcement echoed through the cabin, the energy shifted. Some passengers groaned in frustration, but most knew exactly why this was happening. This wasn't just a flight delay anymore, it was a full-blown crisis. Jordan, phone still recording, turned the camera toward Karen, who stood stiffly near the beverage cart, her face pale. "So do you still think calling security was the right move?" he asked, his voice laced with sarcasm. Karen's jaw tightened, but she said nothing. Michelle, her fellow flight attendant, exhaled and turned to the nearest passengers. "We sincerely apologize for the inconvenience. Please follow the instructions of the gate agents as you deplane." Her voice was professional, but her eyes flicked toward Karen with barely concealed disappointment. Passengers stood, grabbing their bags and filing toward the exit, but they weren't silent. "I hope she loses her job. This is going viral. They think we'll forget, but we won't." Karen's heart pounded as she turned away from the murmurs, but there was nowhere to hide. At the front of the plane, the captain stepped out of the cockpit. His face was grim as he addressed Karen directly. "Corporate wants a full report from you by the end of the day." Karen nodded stiffly. "Understood." But she understood something else, too. This wasn't just an incident, it was a disaster for her career. Back in the terminal, Ava watched as the passengers of Flight 702 entered the gate area, their expressions ranging from frustration to quiet triumph. Agent Reeves stood beside her, phone pressed to his ear. "Yes, we'll coordinate with legal." He hung up and turned to Ava. "The airline is scrambling. They issued a vague statement about following security protocols, but the public isn't buying it." Ava smirked. "They shouldn't." Jordan approached, holding up his phone. 3 million views. He whistled. "Lady, you just became the face of something big." Ava's smirk faded slightly. She hadn't asked for this kind of attention. Her goal had been to expose discrimination, not become a public figure. But there was no going back now. "Ms. Johnson?" Ava turned to see a well-dressed woman in her 40s walking toward her, phone in hand. "I'm Linda Torres, senior producer at Global News. Would you be willing to give a statement?" Ava hesitated. She had spent months gathering data, analyzing numbers, studying patterns. But now the story was no longer about statistics. It was about her. Reeves leaned in. "This could be the leverage we need." Ava nodded slowly. "Let's talk." Meanwhile, in the airline's corporate headquarters, a crisis meeting was already underway. Executives sat around a long table, watching the viral video on a large screen. The comments scrolled in real time, a flood of outrage. "Fire the flight attendant." "Boycott this airline." "Ava Johnson for president." The CEO, a stern-faced man in his 50s, rubbed his temples. "This is a nightmare." The PR director cleared her throat. "We need to act fast. If we don't control this narrative, it will control us." The head of HR looked at her tablet. "We've launched an internal review of Karen Whitmore's actions. If necessary, we'll issue disciplinary action." "Fire her," the CEO said flatly. The room fell silent. The PR director shifted. "Are you sure?" The CEO nodded. "This is bigger than her now. The world is watching. If we don't act decisively, this airline will be the face of corporate racism." He turned to his assistant. "Draft the statement. Effective immediately. Karen Whitmore is terminated." Back at the airport, Karen's phone buzzed. She pulled it out and saw the email from HR. Subject: termination notice. Her stomach dropped. Just like that, her career was over. Karen stared at her phone screen, the words termination notice blurring in front of her eyes. Her breath hitched. This had to be a mistake. Her fingers trembled as she tapped on the email. Effective immediately. Your employment with Atlantic Airways has been terminated due to a violation of company policies regarding passenger treatment and security protocol. The words burned. Karen had been with the airline for nearly a decade. She had followed the rules. How had this spiraled so completely out of control? A voice snapped her back to reality. "Karen?" She looked up to see Michelle standing in front of her, suitcase in hand. But the usual warmth in Michelle's expression was gone. "They fired me," Karen blurted out, her voice barely above a whisper. Michelle sighed. "I figured." Karen searched her face for sympathy. "You don't think this is fair, do you?" "I was just following protocol." Michelle studied her for a long moment. "No, Karen. You weren't." Karen's stomach twisted. Michelle shook her head. "You didn't call security because Ava was a threat. You called because you felt something was off." But what was actually off? Karen's mouth opened, but no words came. Was it her skin color? Michelle continued. Was it the way she was writing in a notebook? If she were a white man in a suit taking notes, would you have reacted the same way? Karen's hands clenched around her phone. I don't know. Michelle exhaled. "That's the problem, Karen." She hoisted her bag over her shoulder. "Take care of yourself." And with that, she walked away, leaving Karen standing alone in the gate area, drowning in the weight of her own actions. Across the terminal, Ava sat in a quiet lounge area, a microphone clipped to her collar. "Rolling," said a cameraman from Global News. Linda Torres, the senior producer, leaned forward. "Ava, walk us through what happened." Ava took a deep breath. "I was on flight 702, minding my own business, writing in my notebook. Suddenly, security was at my seat, asking me to come with them. The flight attendant, Karen, claimed I was acting suspicious." Linda nodded. "And the FBI?" Ava allowed herself a small smirk. "That's the ironic part. I am involved in security matters, but not in the way Karen assumed." She gestured toward her notebook. "I've been researching racial profiling in the airline industry. And today, I became the case study." Linda glanced at her notes. "You're working with federal agents now?" Ava hesitated, then nodded. "Yes. The FBI has been investigating these patterns, and my research aligns with their findings. This is bigger than just one flight. Linda's eyes lit up. So this isn't just about your experience. It's about systemic discrimination? Exactly, Ava said firmly. And now the world is watching. Back at Atlantic Airways headquarters, the PR team was in full damage control mode. The CEO stood with his arms crossed as his marketing director ran through the latest numbers. Our stock has dropped 6% since the video went viral. Customers are demanding refunds, and hashtags like Boycott Atlantic Airways are trending worldwide. The CEO's jaw tightened. What's our response plan? The PR director cleared her throat. We've already fired the flight attendant responsible. That's not enough, the CEO interrupted. We need to be proactive. He turned to the legal team. Reach out to Ava Johnson. Offer a public apology. Maybe a settlement. The room fell silent. The PR director hesitated. Sir, do you think she'll accept? The CEO's expression hardened. She'll have to. If she doesn't, we'll be facing lawsuits, government investigations, and long-term brand damage. He glanced at the massive screen displaying Ava's interview. We need to get ahead of this. Because if she refuses to play along, he exhaled. We're in deep trouble. Ava sat at a quiet cafe inside the airport, sipping on a rapidly cooling cup of coffee. Her phone buzzed every few seconds, with new notifications, journalists, activists, and complete strangers flooding her inbox. She was no longer just a researcher. She was now a symbol. Across from her, Agent Reeves scrolled through his phone. The airline just released a statement. Ava raised an eyebrow. Let me guess. A vague apology with no real accountability. Reeves smirked. Pretty much. They deeply regret any misunderstanding and claim they are committed to diversity and inclusion. Ava scoffed. Classic corporate nonsense. Reeves leaned forward. They also fired the flight attendant. Ava hesitated for half a second before nodding. Good. But she's not the root of the problem. Reeves studied her. You're right. But this might be the moment we need. He slid his phone across the table. Their legal team just reached out. They want to meet. Ava's fingers drummed against her coffee cup. Let me guess. A settlement? Likely. She exhaled slowly. I don't want their money. Reeves nodded. That's why I think you should take the meeting anyway. See what they're really offering. Ava smirked. Fine. Let's see how desperate they are. 2 hours later, in a sleek conference room at the airline's corporate office, the tension was thick. Ava sat on one side of the polished glass table, flanked by Reeves and his colleague, Agent Martinez. Across from them, the airline CEO, Mark Holloway, adjusted his tie, trying to maintain an air of confidence. Next to him sat the PR director and the head of legal, both avoiding eye contact. Holloway folded his hands. Ms. Johnson, first, let me personally apologize for what happened to you. The situation was unacceptable, and we take full responsibility. Ava raised an eyebrow. Do you? Or are you just saying that because your stock is plummeting? The PR director flinched. The head of legal cleared her throat. We understand your frustration. That's why we're prepared to offer a generous settlement. I don't want your money, Ava interrupted. Holloway blinked. Excuse me? Ava leaned forward. I didn't do all this work just to walk away with a check. If you really want to make this right, prove it. The room fell silent. Then Holloway exhaled. What do you want? Avadident hesitate. Transparency. Release the data on passenger removals from the past 5 years. Let the public see the patterns. Let them see how often suspicious behavior disproportionately targets people of color. The PR director visibly tensed. That's complicated. Ava smirked. I bet it is. The head of legal interjected. Even if we agreed, that data is confidential. Ava cut her off. Then nothing changes. This will happen again. And next time it won't just be a viral video. It'll be lawsuits, federal investigations, and public trust eroding beyond repair. Holloway rubbed his temples. He knew she was right. Reeves spoke up. "If you don't release the data, we will. The FBI has been gathering its own statistics on racial profiling in air travel." Holloway sighed. He had walked into this meeting thinking they could silence Ava with money. Instead, she was holding all the power. Finally, he nodded. "We'll review what we can release." Ava crossed her arms. "Not good enough. I want a full public commitment, a timeline, and I want independent oversight." Another long silence. Then Holloway exhaled. "Fine. We'll work out the details. But understand this is bigger than just our airline." Ava smirked. "I know. That's the point." The deal wasn't sealed yet, but Ava had won something more valuable than a paycheck. She had forced the system to reckon with itself. The moment Ava walked out of the airline's corporate office, she knew the battle wasn't over. She had forced them into a corner, but corporations as powerful as Atlantic Airways didn't go down easily. Agent Reeves walked beside her, phone pressed to his ear. "Yeah." She held firm. "They caved, sort of." He glanced at Ava. "They'll release some data, but they'll fight to keep control of the narrative." Ava smirked. "Let them try." Reeves nodded, but his expression darkened. "They're already working on their next move." Ava's step slowed. "What do you mean?" Reeves sighed. "Leaks. Smear campaigns. If they can't discredit the message, they'll try to discredit the messenger." Ava scoffed. "I'm a grad student. What dirt could they possibly dig up?" Reeves gave her a look. "They don't need real dirt. They just need doubt." Later that evening, in a dimly lit newsroom, a journalist named Eric Dalton sat in front of his laptop, staring at an email from an anonymous source. Subject: "Exclusive, what the media isn't telling you about Ava Johnson." Eric frowned. He had been following the Flight 702 story, like everyone else, watching as Ava Johnson went from an ordinary passenger to the face of a movement. But he had learned long ago that when a corporate giant was under fire, they never played fair. He clicked on the email. Attached were screenshots of Ava's old social media posts, cherry-picked and taken out of context. One post showed her criticizing airline security policies, labeled proof that she had an agenda. Another was a photo of her at a protest years ago, holding a sign that read "Dismantle Systemic Racism." The email claimed it was evidence of her being anti-law enforcement. Eric sighed. This was weak, manufactured outrage. But it would be enough for certain media outlets to run with. He hesitated for a long moment, then closed the email. He wouldn't be a pawn in their game. But as he reached for his coffee, a notification popped up on his screen. Breaking. Controversy surrounds Flight 702 victim. New questions about her activist past. It had begun. The next morning, Ava woke up to a storm. Her phone was flooded with messages. Social media was on fire. Ava Johnson isn't innocent, she's a radical. She planned this. Just another activist looking for attention. She hates airlines. This was a setup. Ava exhaled, gripping her phone. She had expected backlash, but seeing her name dragged through the mud still stung. A call from an unknown number flashed across the screen. She hesitated, then answered. "Ms. Johnson." The voice was calm, professional. "This is Lisa Reynolds from Atlantic Airways. I'd like to offer you a chance to set the record straight." Ava sat up. "Excuse me?" Lisa continued smoothly. "As you've seen, the media is starting to question your motivations. If you'd like to avoid unnecessary damage to your reputation, we'd be happy to coordinate a joint statement." Ava's stomach twisted. A joint statement? Yes. One that clarifies this was all a misunderstanding, that the airline had no malicious intent, that you appreciate their commitment to change. Ava clenched her jaw. "So you want me to help you clean up your mess?" Lisa sighed. "Ms. Johnson, public perception changes quickly. One day you're a hero, the next you're an opportunist, a corporate activist, a fraud. She let the words sink in. This is your chance to control the story. Ava's grip tightened on the phone. She had a choice. Play it safe, clear her name, and let the airline spin this into a PR victory. Or stand her ground and prepare for war. Ava's fingers tightened around the phone. Lisa Reynolds waited on the other end, her offer hanging in the air like a trap waiting to be sprung. A joint statement. A way to clarify what happened. A corporate rewrite of reality. Ava inhaled slowly. Let me get this straight. You want me to help you convince the public that this was just a misunderstanding? Lisa's voice remained smooth, practiced. Not at all. We simply want to ensure the facts are clear before misinformation spreads further. Ava let out a sharp laugh. You mean before the truth spreads further? Lisa's tone cooled. Ms. Johnson, public support is fickle. Right now people see you as a victim. But if enough doubt creeps in, they'll move on or worse, turn against you. Ava glanced at her laptop, where a news segment dissected her past activism. The airline strategy was obvious. They couldn't erase what had happened, so they were trying to muddy the waters just enough to make people question whether it even mattered. She exhaled. Here's the thing, Lisa. I don't care if the public turns on me, because this was never about me. It's about everyone who's been targeted, humiliated, or kicked off a plane for no reason other than someone else's assumptions. Silence. Then Lisa spoke again, her voice clipped. You're making a mistake. No, Ava said. I'm making history. She ended the call. Meanwhile, at Atlantic Airways headquarters, CEO Mark Holloway slammed his phone onto the conference table. She turned us down. The PR director swallowed hard. And the headlines aren't going away. She turned her laptop toward him. Ava Johnson refuses to back down, calls out airline corruption. Flight 702 fallout. Airline attempts to silence whistleblower. FBI investigation expands other airlines under scrutiny. The CEO pinched the bridge of his nose. This was supposed to end today. The legal director cleared her throat. We still have options. Holloway looked up sharply. Like what? She hesitated. If we can't control her, we need to discredit her. Holloway's eyes darkened. What do you have in mind? That evening, Ava met Agent Reeves and Martinez at a small, quiet restaurant in Manhattan. Reeves slid his phone across the table. They're coming after you. Ava read the headline on the screen. Ava Johnson's connections to radical groups exposed. Her stomach clenched. Let me guess, old protest photos, edited quotes, conspiracy theories? Martinez nodded. Grimly. It's coordinated. We've traced some of the sources back to accounts linked to the airline's PR firms. They're planting seeds of doubt. Ava exhaled. I knew they'd try something. I just didn't think they'd go this low this fast. Reeves leaned forward. Listen, Ava. The FBI's investigation into airline discrimination is real. We have enough to push forward, but public pressure is what will make it stick. Ava studied him. And you're telling me this because? Martinez answered. Because they want to make you the story. If they can turn this into a debate about you, people will forget the bigger picture. Reeves nodded. But if you hold your ground, we can expose more than just one airline. We can change the whole industry. Ava set her jaw. Then let's finish what we started. She wasn't backing down. Not now. Not ever. Ava woke up to chaos. Her phone was vibrating nonstop. Her inbox flooded with messages. The smear campaign against her had reached its peak overnight. News anchors debated whether she was an activist with an agenda or a victim of injustice. Social media was split. Some defended her, but others latched onto the manufactured doubt, questioning her motives. She turned on the TV. Ava Johnson's past activism raises questions about her true intentions. Click. Ava shut it off. She had expected this, but expecting it didn't make it any easier. A knock at her hotel door broke her thoughts. Agent Reeves and Martinez stood outside, their expression serious. Time to move, Reeves said. It's happening. An hour later, Ava stood at a press conference podium in downtown Manhattan. Journalists filled the room. Cameras clicked. Live streams rolled. Reeves and Martinez stood off to the side, along with civil rights leaders and attorneys who had joined the fight. The FBI had gathered enough evidence to push forward with a formal investigation not just into Atlantic Airways, but into multiple airlines suspected of systemic discrimination. Ava stepped up to the microphone. She took a breath. Then she spoke. This started with a single flight attendant making a decision based on assumption rather than fact. But the truth is, this problem didn't start or end on Flight 702. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. For years, airlines have quietly engaged in discriminatory practices. They flag black and brown passengers as suspicious, at disproportionate rates. They remove paying customers from flights based on little more than a hunch. And when they're called out, they hide behind vague policies and empty apologies. She looked directly into the cameras. They thought they could silence me, that I'd take their settlement, their joint statement, and walk away. But I'm not here to protect their reputation. I'm here to demand change. She held up a document. This is a federal complaint against Atlantic Airways. It includes first-hand accounts from passengers who have been removed, harassed, or humiliated simply for existing in their own skin. The room buzzed. Reporters typed furiously. The FBI is expanding its investigation, but the public plays a role too. Hold these corporations accountable. Demand transparency. Because if we don't, this will keep happening. She stepped back. The room erupted with questions. Ms. Johnson, do you plan to sue? What about the airline's claims against you? Do you think this will change anything? Ava met the last reporter's gaze. I think change doesn't happen because we ask nicely, she said. It happens because we refuse to back down. She turned and walked away. 1 week later, Atlantic Airways CEO Mark Holloway resigned. The airline announced sweeping policy reforms, promising to release data on passenger removals and implement third-party oversight on discrimination complaints. Other airlines scrambled to update their own policies, hoping to avoid similar scrutiny. The movement Ava had ignited didn't die down. It grew. Airline employees came forward, exposing internal pressure to racially profile passengers under the guise of security concerns. Legislators proposed new regulations to prevent racial bias in air travel. The world had changed, and Ava was at the center of it. 3 months later, Ava boarded a plane again. A different airline, a different destination. But as she walked down the aisle, a flight attendant met her gaze and smiled, not the nervous, suspicious smile she was used to, but one of recognition. Ava took her seat. She pulled out her notebook, and this time no one questioned it. The story of Flight 702 may have ended, but the conversation about justice, accountability, and change is far from over. Stories like Ava's happen every day in airports, offices, stores, anywhere assumptions override fairness. If this story resonated with you, let us know. Have you ever witnessed or experienced something similar? Let's keep the conversation going in the comments. And before you go, where in the world are you watching from? Drop your country or city below. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more powerful stories that challenge the way we see the world. Your voice matters. Let's make it heard.